Okay, I think we can make a start. Well, you're all very welcome at this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband. All right. These microphones are a bit variable. Is that better? Okay. You're all very welcome at this meeting of the Planning Committee. I'm Councillor James Husband, Chairman of the Committee. To my right are my fellow councillors, and it will be the five of us making the decision on the matters in front of us this evening. To my left, we're joined by officers who will be presenting the report and also answering questions that we have in due course. So with that in mind, can I first of all say, are there any apologies for absence? There are none. Are there any declarations of interest? There are none. Are there any other declarations? No, there are none. Okay. Well, in that case, we can move straight on to, we have the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of July. Can I ask colleagues, can I sign those as a record? Thank you. Thank you. Well, in that case, we can move very rapidly on to the main business of the evening, which is to consider the application for Warnington Green Phase 3. And that is going to be introduced by Martin Lomas. And Martin, so when you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. I am going to present a summary of the planning application before you tonight. This presentation is just a descriptive summary of the scheme before you. It's not intended to be a detailed setting out of the scheme or the assessment in the officer's report. On this slide, you can see a satellite image showing the original estate layout that was built between 1964 and 1985. The original estate comprised 538 social rented homes. The red shaded area is the area of interest tonight, and that's the area that relates to the planning application before you. In terms of orientation, I'm sure you all know where the site is, but you can see Ladbroke Grove to the west and the Great Western Main Line to the northeast. So as set out in section 4 of the committee report, a hybrid planning application for the phased redevelopment of the estate was made in 2009 and approved by the council in 2010. Phase 1 was submitted in detail with the remainder of the development in outline. That permission was for up to 1,000 homes, re-provision of community facilities, including an adventure playground, relocation and re-provision of Athlone Gardens, and around 3,000 square metres of commercial floor space. It included buildings of up to 9 stories in height, and the associated Section 106 agreement secured the replacement of the existing social rent housing by floor space and a minimum of 538 homes by number. It included 30 shared ownership homes, new community facilities which comprised 1,883 square metres in total, and that included re-provision of the outdoor space, and the Section 106 secured the re-provision of Athlone Gardens. As set out in the report, Section 73 planning permissions varying that 2010 permission were granted in 2014 and 2024. The 2014 permission mainly varied the phasing from 5 phases to 3, which is the image you see on your screen showing the 3 phases that were approved in 2014, and the 2024 permission dealt with various changes to conditions. It's all set out in section 4 of the committee report. Phase 1 is complete. It's delivered 324 homes. Phase 2 is expected to reach practical completion this month, or if not, very soon after, delivering 313 homes. So the applicant has submitted a full planning application for the Phase 3 site rather than a reserve matters application under the original outline application. They have given various reasons for doing this. One is the acquisition of the Open Door Friendship Centre, also known as Portobello Hall. If you can see my cursor, not sure if you can, but it's the orange area in the top left. That means the red line boundary for the Phase 3 area is changed and requires a full application. But the fundamental reason is the applicant has stated that the maximum 1,000 homes granted in the outline could not be delivered in the approved parameters under current space standards that are in place today. They've also identified other shortcomings, again set out in 4.11 and 4.12 of the report. So this is the Phase 3 application site showing existing buildings that are currently in situ. You can see Phase 2, both Block 4 and Block 6 delivered there. Currently, the Phase 3 application site contains 179 homes. Portobello Hall, as previously identified here, and the hut, which is occupied by the Youth Action Alliance. Moving on, the site is subject to a site allocation in the council's local plan. Site allocations are essentially the locations that the council has identified to deliver the vision for good growth in the borough and provide the homes, jobs and community uses needed. The site allocation for the Warnington Green Phase 3 land is for a minimum 373 homes, the refurbishment or replacement of improved community facilities and high quality public open space, including adventure playground. The site allocation also sets out a number of principles and infrastructure requirements. I'm not going to read them all on the slide. You're aware of them from the committee report. The council also adopted a planning brief for the site in 2009. So the Phase 3 planning application before you tonight for consideration is for the demolition of the existing buildings on site and the erection of 6 blocks ranging from 4 to 15 stories in height. And that's the provision for the provision of between 368 and 370 homes, 206 to 208 of which would be social rent homes, 7 shared ownership and 155 open market homes. The provision of ground floor commercial space and the provision of a replacement community centre with associated playground and flexible floor space, including the reprovision of the steel pan workshop. This slide shows the proposed layout of the development. It's included labels, would be reference to various blocks tonight. So you see blocks 5 and 10 are the linear blocks backing onto the railway. Block 7 is the community centre block, which fronts onto Ladbroke Grove and the new section of Portobello Road. Similarly with Block 8 to the north of Block 7. Then Block 9 in the centre of the image, which is 2 separate buildings. One is the U-shaped building, which is 4 to 6 stories in height, and the building that fronts onto the neighbourhood square, which is 15 stories in height. This image, you can also see the ground floor uses, just to navigate yourself in terms of the location, but the mustard colour is effectively the commercial uses. The lime green, hopefully that is the colour that's coming through on the screen behind me, is the community uses. Community uses, and the community centre, as I previously advised is Block 7, and that's in the light yellow, residential amenity in red, and all the remaining colours are residential units or lobbies / plant associated with those residential buildings. So this is showing you the street layout in a little more detail. I've included this simply because, as originally submitted, the application included a vehicular link to Ladbroke Grove, the roundabout connecting Ladbroke Grove and Barby Road. However, that was revised and removed from the scheme during the course of the application. That's now just a two-way cycle link and pedestrian link. And the road layout you see in this image is effectively the revised scheme before you now. So you can see with the red arrows is a one-way loop up Portobello Road and round Warnington Road. Portobello Road is proposed to be a shared surface that loops all the way round to Warnington Road and down into the chicaned area, effectively ending in front of the core of Block 10C, which, again, hopefully you see my cursor, but it's here. What you'll also see on here is the proposed 32 on-street parking spaces. Just sticking with layout, the existing Phase 3 site contains 43 trees, as surveyed by the applicant in 2021. This plan shows trees in relation to the original estate buildings. This plan is the applicant's tree retention and removal plan. So the red trees are those proposed for removal. The green trees are those proposed for retention. You can see the trees being removed include those where roads or buildings are proposed. Some of those trees are also not suitable for long-term retention. Others are in sunken courtyards. This is where Block 9 would be. And some trees have been ruled out due to condition or presence of decay. The applicant has explored retention of other trees, but has concluded it's not feasible within the parameters of the proposed scheme. This image, I'll just refer back to that slide. So you'll see in the middle T27, 28, 29, 30, 31 and 32, which are to the north of the 15-storey building, are trees that have been retained through alterations to the road layout that effectively create a kind of chicaned shared surface area on Warnington Road, and that has allowed the retention of those trees. I just included a slide to show you what those trees are like. They are London plane trees. This is the proposed tree planting plan. The proposal is to plant 49 semi-mature trees, and that is all as part of the Phase 3 proposals. As you'll see in the blue cloud, on top of the 49 trees proposed, there's also 13 trees being planted as part of the Phase 2B proposals in the outline application, which, because of the overlap, are included in the red line boundary for the Phase 3 site. I thought I should make that clear. The largest of the trees to be planted are 3 pin oaks, which are the dark blue trees in the neighbourhood square to the north. They would be planted at 50 to 60 centimetres girth on planting. There are 5 field maples and 3 rowans proposed at 20 to 25 centimetre girth. They are the trees in the blue cloud as part of the Phase 2 planting. The other 51 trees would be planted at 25 to 30 centimetre girth as proposed by the applicant. In addition, as set out in the heads of terms in the report, a contribution of £20,000 is proposed, which would be for additional planting of 17 trees within the Phase 1 area, and they were identified as a result of exploratory works which were funded by a contribution secured in the 2024 permission. Moving on to the buildings, this is the front and rear elevations of blocks 5 and 10, the blocks on the railway. You'll see they are predominantly 8 stories, dropping down to 7 stories towards the northern end. These blocks would be finished in a pale stop brick with some tonal variation, and the upper stories finished in a black brick, which is where you see the variation in the image. This is just a 3D visualization of that block to give you a greater sense of the form of the building. And this image shows blocks 5 and 10 on the right hand side. You can see the heavily sculpted elevation, and the building, this is looking north on Warnington Road. This is another view showing that building. And moving on to block 8, this is the elevations of that building. This is this building effectively is a kind of flat iron block, which reflects the traditional use of a bullnose design. Again, this is obviously not an architectural drawing, but just a 3D visualization of what the building would look like. This is an image showing what the building would look like from across the neighbourhood square. This is the building from a very untrafficked Ladbroke Grove. This, moving on to the block 7, the community centre. The image at the bottom is the Portobello Road elevation, so you'll see the part 5, part 2, part single story aspects to the building, and the wall that contains the proposed outdoor area associated with the community centre, and on the far left, the steel pan workshop. This is an image of the community centre on Ladbroke Grove. You can see block 8 and block 9 in the image too. This is an image looking up Portobello Road. See, there's the wall with the outdoor space behind it and the steel pan workshop element. And that's just another image further up Portobello Road. This plan shows the ground floor layout of the community centre and the associated outdoor space. Moving on to block 9. Block 9, as I said, contains 2 buildings. One, the U-shaped building, which is the building on the right-hand side, and the 15-storey building, which is the building on the left-hand side in this image. Here's some visualizations provided by the applicant in their application, showing the 15-storey building, and in the right-hand image, the lower building looking up Portobello Road. And this is just looking up Warnington Road at the same buildings. And this is the central courtyard in block 9B. And then that's just an image showing the neighbourhood square at the foot of the 15-storey building and the shared surface road that loops round through the neighbourhood square. And then picking up images from the visual impact assessment. So this is view 1. We've seen this in the report. In this view, you can see the flank elevation of block 10 here. You can see the 15-storey block 9A here, and you can see block 8 there. This is looking north up Ladbroke Grove. Again, you can see the 15-storey building here and the community centre block 7 here. And then this is view 5 from MZ Horniman Pleasance Gardens, showing the rear of block 10 and block 9 in the distance. And as the committee report says, this is an outdated visualization because the elevation to the rear of block 10 has changed. I showed you those elevations before, but it gives you a sense of the massing of that building. Effectively, these lighter brick areas do not protrude up anymore. That is finished in a dark brick as the rest of the upper story. And then just a very summary slide of the recommendation. The application is recommended for approval on the basis that it delivers much needed housing and affordable housing. The new community centre would be re-provided and it would enhance the existing facilities. In the officer's report, some less than substantial has been identified to nearby assets. This was assessed in both instances at the lower end of the spectrum and outweighed by the public benefits. The scheme, in officer's view, is considered of exceptionally high standards of architecture, responding well to the surroundings. Departures from policies D9 and CD8 in relation to tall buildings were found and given moderate weight in the assessment, and departures in relation to the unit mix of the market housing was also found, being overly skewed towards smaller units. However, officers, noting that development plan policies pull in different directions, concluded that the scheme complies with the development plan overall. That concludes the presentation.
Martin, can you refer to the addendum?
I can. I've just been asked by the legal officer just to refer to the addendum report that members have before them to note the proposed changes to the conditions and the report, and also the additional representations that have been received since the publication of the committee report. I know members have both the addendum report and all the representations before them tonight.
Thank you very much indeed. Now we have speakers for this case. So if I can ask, the objectors will go first, and then Councillor Lowry, you're able to speak as ward councillor. How would you and your colleagues, how would you like to do this? It's very much up to you. Between you, you've got up to 10 minutes in total. How would you like to do it?
Sure. Firstly, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your email the other day regarding our speaking time. So what we'll do is we'll speak for 10 minutes, and Mr. Peterson will go first, followed by Ms. Jones, then I'll conclude. If you let us know when the time starts, that's the order that we'll follow.
That sounds very good to me. Excellent. So, as I say, the total time is 10 minutes. If I can just get this in front of me, clock in front of me. And Mr. Peterson, please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of the Kensington Society. I have rehearsed this. I'm going to try and cover it in 2.5 minutes, and Councillor Lowry will give me a nudge if I start overrunning. Our objection is specific to the lack of policy compliance with London Plan D9 on tall buildings and the Borough's policy CD8. Your officer report accepts that 112 and at several other points that there is non-compliance, argues it is of moderate weight and to be outweighed in the planning balance. We do not agree with that. Your own policy CD8 is clearly written, and Part D is very relevant. It's a shame that the full policy is not set out in the report. It says tall buildings will only be acceptable within those locations that are identified as suitable for tall buildings, as shown in Figure 6.4 and at the height specified in the relevant site allocations. This is not hedged about with wording such as generally or normally. It says what it says, as does D9. I don't have time to go through the history of the intervention by the then Secretary of State Robert Jenrick, which led to this clear wording in London Plan D9. At the examination of the local plan, Michael Bark and I made written and oral representations on London Plan D9. The inspector asked for a modification, saying to aid clarity, the supporting text should set out the thrust of the local plan that tall buildings are not acceptable in principle where they fall outside the identified suitable locations. Paragraph 666 was added to the adopted plan, repeating that wording. Not accepted in principle, and please note the in principle. The new local plan includes the required map of tall building locations at Figure 6.4. Warnington is not on it. Appropriate heights are included in all site allocations, other than for Warnington SA5, where a 14-storey building is mentioned only under the relevant planning history. It is not history. The 2021 application is the one before you tonight. There is no mention of 14 storeys in the pink box on principles in the site allocation. The report says the site is not identified as a suitable location, and there is an inevitable departure from Local Plan CD8 and London Plan D9. We do not understand the inevitability of this departure. The Council could easily have modified the local plan at examination stage to bring the site allocation and the map of tall building locations in conformity with what was proposed in terms of a 15-storey building. I'll finish off very quickly. I think reliance on the Hillingdon judgment would be risky. This is the first scenario we're aware of where a new local plan restates and meets all the requirements of D9, but then completely fails to follow its own new policy, CD8 Part D. This opens the door to developers ignoring both London Plan and borough policy from now onwards, coming forward with new locations where they want a tall building. The precedental risk is why Kensington societies are objecting. So we're looking for an explanation of why it's inevitable that this position has been reached, and as we say, we do not see this as a moderate departure from policy. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go next. Hello, councillors. Microphone on. Hello. We say Phase 3 is not an isolated project. It must be considered as part of the much larger Warnington Green development that has already had a significant environmental impact. Overall, this development will result in the loss of 270 mature trees and more than 10,000 square metres of public amenity green space. And just to visualise that, that is the size of Athlone Gardens Park, 10,000 square metres. And it will have added 63 more parking spaces onto our already overburdened streets. Tonight is our last chance to mitigate this cumulative harm. Warnington Trees Community Group does not oppose this development. We advocate for it being improved. This is your opportunity to impose conditions that will benefit public health, biodiversity, climate resilience, and our local economy. I'll talk first about trees. The Phase 3 arboricultural impact assessment is flawed and open to challenge. Firstly, it ignores the loss of 32 additional mature trees felled in 2015. Secondly, it predicts a sudden decline in the capital asset value of existing trees in 2050 with no logical explanation as to why all these healthy trees might die. And finally, it overestimates the capital asset value of proposed new trees. Large mature trees are essential urban infrastructure. They are not decorative extras. Developers justify mass felling with lazy and weak arguments. Thoughtful adjustments to building lines, roads, and utilities could save many trees, but these solutions are ignored. If we don't insist on these minor accommodations, we set a precedent. Soon there will be little space for magnificent trees anywhere in London. We originally advocated for 13 additional trees to be saved in Phase 3. Every one was vetoed. We say at minimum the following 5 trees must be retained. T8, this London plane is a prominent street tree on Ladbroke Grove. T7 and T6 are 2 Norway maples that stand in an existing pedestrian walkway. That walkway will be re-provided, but without the trees. And T33 and T34, another 2 healthy London planes, stand on a public footpath, so no reason to get rid of them. The developers have known for years that residents want these trees saved. They've had ample time to adjust their plans. New tree planting must also be strengthened. The flawed CAVAT assessment means the tree planting proposal for Phase 3 is inadequate. Many more trees of larger varieties and more densely spaced must be planted to compensate for the loss. I turn now to parking and public amenity space. Shifting 32 on-estate parking spaces onto public streets is an unacceptable land grab. In a ward where 68% of households do not even have access to a car, prioritising vehicle storage over community use of public land makes no sense whatsoever. Developers must provide underground car parking to replace lost spaces. As well as increasing on-street parking, Phase 3 removes about 7,000 square metres of public green space. Peabody offers only 3,000 square metres of replacement public green space, but even that claim is misleading. Much of this space is enclosed within a courtyard and the community centre. The remaining 1,145 square metres is highly fragmented, hence it doesn't provide optimal amenity for play, relaxation and other uses. So, how do we fix this? Developers present a false choice, homes versus trees and green space. Good planning requires both to create livable, attractive environments where communities can thrive. The shared streets concept in Phase 3 is most welcome, but it doesn't go far enough to repair the cumulative damage that's been done. We cannot bring back lost trees or built over land, but we can act now to prevent further harm. We put before you tonight a vision for a leafy, pleasant and livable neighbourhood that will go a long way to rectifying the harms I've just outlined. Our proposed scheme will create attractive, pedestrian prioritised streets in the European style, providing more trees and greenery, plus additional space for play, socialising, outdoor dining and a vibrant community market. This is not an impossible dream. It is practical, achievable and necessary. The conditions we propose are not radical, they are common sense. I do urge you to support them. Thank you, and I'll now hand over to Councillor Lowry, who will outline the conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To alleviate the most unacceptable parts of the plan, we're proposing 4 detailed and appropriate conditions to enhance the vision to benefit residents of the local economy, which were forwarded to you yesterday. Firstly, enhanced quality and density of new tree planting. All newly planted trees must be semi-mature specimens selected in consultation with the community. These bring positive contributions to biodiversity, public health and the local economy. Secondly, we propose extended pedestrian prioritised streets, also known as shared streets. These are a welcome feature to the plan, but they don't go far enough. We're proposing to extend the boundary of the shared streets to Faraday Road, encompassing Murchison Gardens, Athlone Gardens and Faraday Road in the area between Portobello and Warrington Roads. This would create significant benefit for the local economy in Goulburn and North Kensington and a safer neighbourhood. Thirdly, we propose public realm handover and maintenance funding to RBKC to allow the community to reap the benefits. And fourthly, we propose retaining the mature trees as Ms Jones has outlined in her speech. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, what Goulburn residents in and around the estate have lost and experienced with the delay, disregard and uncertainty cannot be understated, whether it be loss of homes, community well-being or 10,000 metres squared of green space. Tonight is the chance to at least some of this right under your Charter for Public Participation. We hope you accept our conditions to make this application acceptable.
Thank you very much indeed. Absolutely on the 10 minutes. Thank you. So we now have representatives of the applicant present, and I think Phil Church, you're with us, I'm sure. Mr. Church, are you? And I think you're going to lead off on this. So please, when you're ready, you've got up to 10 minutes as well.
Hi, good evening and thank you for hearing this application tonight. My name is Phil Church, I'm the Land and Partnerships Director at Peabody and I'm here to present our application for the final phase of the regeneration at Warnington Green. Just a little bit about Peabody. Peabody are long-term custodians of our estates. We invest in our communities in and around the 108,000 owned and managed properties throughout London and the South East. Over 4,000 of those are in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. As part of that investment in 2005, we identified the existing homes at Warnington Green were no longer fit for purpose, being of poor condition and issues of overcrowding. This led to gaining planning permission in 2010 for a master plan to deliver 1,000 new homes, and we're just about to complete Phase 2B, taking the overall total delivered homes to 637, of which 57% are affordable. Now we recognise that estate regeneration can be a challenging time for our residents, which is why residents and the local community have been an integral part to shape the final proposals presented to you this evening. Key to this is our engagement with the resident steering group, who ensure community feedback is heard, helping us shape and align our proposals to the needs of residents. We've also held numerous consultation events, including community fund days over several years since before and since the application has been submitted. We submitted this application in 2021, and that design has changed significantly to address consultee and community comments. Through positive collaboration with officers, as outlined tonight, we've made significant improvements to several aspects of the proposed development, such as improved public realm through the pedestrianisation of the route through to Ladbroke Grove, as well as energy and fire strategy, the latter including the introduction of a second stair core in Block 9A. We've listened to the feedback from local groups and are committed to delivering high quality place in and around our homes, and as such we are pleased that this final phase will provide a new public square, retain 12 trees and plant 49 new semi-mature trees. This final phase, should you approve it tonight, will enable Peabody to complete our commitments made in our original application. And there are three main benefits I'd like to highlight. We continue our commitment to deliver affordable homes with 208 social rented homes, with some required to complete the decant of the estate. At least 97 of these will be available to the borough housing waiting list. Secondly, we are delivering a new purpose-built community centre following extensive consultation with the existing community centre, RBKC and the wider community. We commit to re-providing existing community space for the YIA as well, and we're in consultation with them as well. And thirdly, the new community centre will enable the completion of the final phase of our Central Park, Athelane Gardens, delivering a public central community park at the heart of our estate. So this phase will complete the master plan, providing a genuine tenure-blind scheme, increasing public realm, improved connectivity and pedestrian routes, overall ensuring this community continues to thrive. So yeah, thank you for your time, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, our opportunity to ask either side questions. Who'd like to go first on this? Tom. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. The first question I'd like to ask is around one of the proposals put forward by the objectors. Sorry, this is a question for the applicants. And is around the extension of the shared space streets. And as Councillor Lowry outlined, they're proposing to extend the shared space streets throughout so much of the scheme. Can you give us your thoughts on that? Why? I mean, it seems on the face of it a sensible suggestion to me, and I can certainly see benefits from it. Can you let us know if you've considered it, what your thoughts are on it, if it's something you are able to implement?
So the shared streets, so we saw this objection come through and the suggestion for shared streets, and it's what we quite like is that the recognition that the loop around the top and the apex does recognise that that is going to be a shared street in the future, and we will review. Obviously, we've only just seen this, that we do need to review internally as the team in terms of the extension of that shared streets, but it's something that we can take on board and come back.
Chair, I just wonder whether the objectors would like to make any further comment on that shared space scheme.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, just to come in here. So this condition which you received in the document we outlined is basically an extension of what the lead member for planning effectively supported in his deliberations with residents. Now, the genesis for this is it's an extremely positive vision of how the entire environment will look like. And we were discussing this, like, think about how European cities are. compared to London. Like, what we're trying to create here, what I think the developer's trying to create, is a sort of resident-friendly, but also like a sort of a landmark which anyone coming through North Kensington would see and would basically welcome. And at the moment, it just doesn't do that. The design is, quite frankly, lackluster and provides significant detractions. But in order to try and alleviate that, extending shared streets to create a safer neighbourhood, more pedestrianised functions, more street furniture, cycling and pedestrian infrastructure would enhance the local economy, provide more footfall towards businesses. We have evidence that increased pedestrianisation of local streets improves business performance by around 30% for local businesses. We need that in Goulburn and North Kensington. And I think for the developer to follow through on that, it would need to be conditioned. And we're very grateful that the lead member has supported this.
Can I just follow up Councillor Bennett's point there by going back to the applicant? Because my understanding is that the streets that we're talking about that are actually part of Phase 1 and Phase 2, which Councillor and residents have suggested become shared spaces, that they have actually already been adopted by the Council as highway. Now, they are also not part of this planning application, because this planning application is relating to Phase 3. From what you said earlier, I'm not trying to sidestep my own any responsibilities that I have as chairman of this committee, but am I right in thinking that what you're saying on behalf of Peabody is that in principle, you're quite happy to consider shared space for these other roads outside Phase 3, but that would be a discussion between Peabody and the council leadership. Okay, am I right in understanding? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, you're right in your understanding of that. And you're right as well in terms of the other streets being part of the earlier phases, which are not captured by the red line of Phase 3. But that's the general thrust of Peabody's. They would recommend to do that, but obviously we need to do some more consultation and work out the mechanisms of capturing that additional space within not this Section 106, but how we come back to you with those schemes.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you very much for that. Sorry to butt in. Anne and then Toby. And Councillor Saran.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you for your comments about the shared streets. I mean, if you don't mind me saying, it just sounds a little bit weak. So you're saying that you want to do it, you want to consult, you want this vision, but you don't give us any kind of commitment that that's going to happen. And I think we need a bit more commitment here, I think, across the board. And we'll go through some of the areas that have been raised by the objectors. But, in my mind, there's a lot of disruption for local residents, lots of people who are unhappy about various aspects. And I'd like to make sure that we can do what's needed to reassure people and give them something back, so that they feel a part of this development. So what further reassurance can you give us that the shared streets will be committed to?
And absolutely, that's Peabody's want as well, that, they know that there's been construction on this site for a very long time, and it does cause a whole lot of disruption for residents. I think in terms of that shared street, they can commit to the areas that are within their red line, and that's as far as in terms of this planning application that's before you now. But then we would need to take away, because obviously you've got some of the streets that have already been adopted by your highways, which we'd need to look at and amend. So there is different mechanisms that we would need to go through to be able to do the rest of the estate and the linkage down to Athlone Gardens. So I think there is a commitment from Peabody to look at this in terms of the red line here, and then the mechanisms of how we do that and tie that in on the earlier phases.
Well, I mean, I guess, thank you for that commitment. And, you know, we have a lot of witnesses here, so I hope this is something that we can work on during and after this meeting. I guess I also wanted to understand about the trees. And, you know, I'm really familiar with this site, and I remember phase 2 and phase 1, and I remember how upset people were about the trees, and particularly about the way that the trees were cut. People feel very emotionally about them, and it's not just the health benefits, the biodiversity, but I think what I'm sort of hearing here is that there are a few trees, and I'm not a tree expert, but looking at the ones on Ladbroke Grove in particular, which possibly could be saved. So without wanting to go through every single tree, I would like some reassurance that you've looked at the schedule that's been provided by the objectors, and, you know, whether you'd be prepared to save some of these trees for the sake of the development. But really, I think what I'd like to know is how much attention has been given to this.
Yes, this is something that we have actually spent quite a long time in reviewing. In 2010, the original master plan for phase 3 identified around 41 to 43 trees to be removed, 7 to be retained, and 19 to be planted. And since we've looked at the detailed application for phase 3, we've really taken on board the comments from the local community and local stakeholders, and really have tried to address those concerns in trees. And as a result, we're now decreased the number of trees we're removing. It's gone down to 31. We're now retaining 12 rather than 7, and we're replanting 49 trees. And as part of that process, since we originally submitted the application, we have gone through all the trees that have been identified for removal and reviewed every single one to ensure there's a genuine reason why those trees need to be removed. Every single tree that's been identified is either due to the fact that it's a low-quality tree, or it's generally conflicting the structure or the infrastructure being provided to either deliver the new community centre, or the size of the community centre, or the number of homes on the development. We have tried to retain as many trees as possible, and we have generally ensured that where possible, if we can retain that tree, we have done. So we have spent a lot of time, and we submitted a report to the Wanting Tree Group demonstrating where we've actually looked at the design of the accommodation as well to see whether or not we can try and retain those trees. So we generally have tried to take we've understood the concerns of the community, and that's why as well, in terms of the 49 trees that we were planting, we spent a lot of time making sure that we've reviewed the species of the trees, the type of trees, to make sure that they're the most appropriate tree to thrive in that urban environment. So yeah, it's something that we have tried to address and reduce the number of trees to be removed as much as possible.
Of the objectors to comment on that. But I guess what I'm really trying to get to is, are there still trees here that can be saved, and what can we do? And, you know, I'm thinking actually of the ones on Ladbroke Grove, which obviously I'm not a tree expert, but I can't see why those would need to be removed.
So we believe there are trees that can be saved, and we feel that, yes, the developers have come up with reasons to remove every single tree, but we believe that some of those reasons are very weak, particularly when it comes to cabling for broadband under the pavement. You know, that can be put somewhere else. You know, they're very inflexible about the building lines and the lines of the roadways. We believe that those can be varied, and they've had a very, very long time to adjust their plans to accommodate these trees, and they just haven't done it. And I believe that it's just too hard. You know, it's just like, it's easier to chop them down. When it comes to the arboricultural impact assessment, there were a very large number of trees cut down in 2015. So after the planning permission had been granted for the whole estate, but before this phase application went in. And those were big mature trees in the courtyard of Olive Blythe House. There were about 3 plane trees in the Portobello Road car park, and then 2 more plane trees along, which you can still see the stumps of on the corner of Warnington Road and what is now Murchison Gardens. Those trees are not included in the arboricultural impact report. So, you know, the whole thing is really, really flawed.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I have a couple of questions, but first, I'd like to address this first to the applicant and their objectives, which is really just about this entire process of consultation. I'm noticing in your briefing, you named 12 residents, so you've got a steering group of 12. I don't see any other information about how those residents were embedded in the community, etc. I mean, I can tell you that I have 101 emails objecting to this, or at least expressing their concerns in kind of quite direct contradiction to your proposals. And my question is, firstly to you, how do you assure us about the robustness of your consultation leading up to this and how representative it is on the actual local opinion?
Yeah, happy to address that. I think from the start of the process that we've undertaken on Mornington, as Phil said earlier, engagement with residents and consultation with residents has been at the heart of what we've done, not only from the original process of deciding whether the state should be regenerated or not, but obviously from the master plan that was submitted in 2009 and also this application. We've consulted extensively prior to the application being submitted, but also since the application has been submitted and the various changes that have been made. That's been done in a number of different ways. That's been through the, as was mentioned, the RSG, so the resident steering group made up of residents on the estate. A specific design working group has been created for residents so that they have the ability to feed into our design. There was a community centre working group that was set up to design and comment upon the proposals being made for that to ensure that there was a long-term sustainable community centre built. We've also carried out a number of different consultation exercises, including door knocking, pop-up events, surveys. We also consulted extensively during COVID using a lot of the online methods that were available at the time. So I think that generally throughout this process we have consulted with residents and we can demonstrate clearly where their views have been taken on. That includes on changes to the highways layout, but also includes how materials were selected, layout of the new homes, layout of the community centre. So I think there are a number of ways we can demonstrate that their views have been taken on board.
I can see what's in your briefing. My question is really about how we can trust how robust that process is, but I'll just throw that over to the objectors if you like. What do you feel this consultation process has been like, given you sound like you're in quite direct opposition to some of the things they've put forward?
So I would say that that Peabody have done a lot of consultation of varying quality, and they have latterly engaged with the Warnington Trees Community Group, although that took a very, very long time. I feel like yes, they do all the necessary engagements, but I don't think they listen to what people are saying. You know, I think it's just like a tick box exercise where, yes, we've done it, but we haven't really changed anything particularly, well, certainly regarding the trees anyway.
Understood, thank you.
I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, there is a bare minimum statutory level of consultation one has to do.
Yeah.
Sure, that's been done.
Yes.
Which resident supports the 15-storey tower, which Henry Peterson very, very clearly outlined was against our own local plan, and we'd be very easily challenged in court, for example. But what residents have tried to do is engage, which is why they've come up with a list of conditions to alleviate the most egregious aspects of the plan. And I think that's a perfect example of sort of where co-design can come into place. Yeah. if the committee were to adopt the conditions, which are all written in detailed planning language and policy, and you've all seen the briefing documents sent around, that would go a long way. Just having sort of superficial, oh, we'll take a look at it, we'll have a discussion behind the scenes to see if we can accommodate this. Those aren't strong enough commitments from the developer. It's up to you as the planning authority to actually set the minimum expectations through a condition to make sure that work does happen.
Thank you. I mean, my views on consultation are pretty well documented, but I would also, just as a note, say that, yeah, commitment or verbal commitment isn't really a commitment. A commitment would be actually adopting what's been suggested or not. You know, one or the other, you either do or you don't. I have another question, if you don't mind, Chair, which is ultimately best addressed to officers, but while everyone's here, it has been brought to my attention. So there are conditions outlining quite drastic changes to the hours of use of the community centre, and those are very dramatic reduction in hours. Now, I live nearby. The Venture Centre is currently an utterly invaluable community resource, and it really needs those hours. So my question is, does this come from the applicant? If so, what's the rationale? I mean, it's a very troubling development, because if they can't actually operate the way they are currently operate, we're in serious trouble. So my question is firstly to the applicants, if it's from them, and if the objector would like to comment after.
That was part of the consideration by the noise officers, and those conditions and the hours were imposed as part of the conditions, and not from our suggestion.
Thank you. I just wanted to rule that part out. And yeah, if objectors, is there any reason whatsoever to believe that noise and nuisance has been an issue from the Venture Centre, or it would be going forward?
So we didn't have enough time in our speech to cover this particular aspect, but this is a huge concern. As you will all be aware, the Venture Centre is probably one of the most vital charities in North Kensington, and their provision is ever growing. There's more and more people taking up their services, and I hold my counsellor surgeries there as well. Every day of the week, it's busy. They also run the food bank. The hours of service are being proposed to be reduced by 50%. I think it's 75% for the outdoor space and about 40-45% for the indoor space. And that would effectively make them unable to continue their function as it stands. It would be impossible for them both to function as a charity and also to raise any revenue. And I think the chairman of the Venture Centre outlined that in an email to all councillors last night. So if the committee were minded to approve this application, there would be a very necessary condition or amendment to that particular hours required. Otherwise, it would be a complete disaster for the community to lose the charity most close to them.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll take that point up with officers, actually, is probably the right way of doing it. Lloyd, would you like to go next? And then Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask the objectors first, but I'm going to give the applicants a little time ahead to think about the question I'm going to ask them. I'm going to go a little bit further to my colleague, Councillor Siren, on trees, and I'm going to specifically ask you about T8, T33 and T34. I was on the estate today. I was speaking to residents. I was looking at a lot of the trees and a lot of the planting. So I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. I'm also going to ask you about enhanced planting. Not necessarily trees, but I'm talking about shrubs and other ways. But first of all, to the objectors, I must admit I was very impressed by the document that was sent through to us. I think it is very sensible, and I like a lot of it. And I would like to see at the end of this that we can come some way, at least, to accommodating that. I would say that where we've got the shared roads, would you be open to those roads being either wider pavements with extra planting in, which is where I'm going to come to the enhanced planting, because it's not going to be a busy main road. So would that be something specific that you're looking at?
Preferably, we'd prefer the all one level kind of approach. And the reason is that we've lost so much public amenity space. The community centre is going to be the northern end of Portobello Road, and the park is on the other side, further south. Now that creates an immediate issue with children running diagonally across a trafficked road from one place to the other. Our proposal is that that whole section of Portobello Road be treated as a play street, and that would create a sort of a continuous public amenity space from the park to the community centre. So you start to see the rationale for making it less like a street and more like a shared space. So yeah, that's our vision, is to make it. And we've also had the market authorities have said that they would be very interested in establishing what they're calling a community market there, which provides services that are not that are neighbourhood services, so things like key cutting and, you know, all the stuff that you can't get anymore could be provided on a street market.
Thank you. Yes, when I was there today, I did notice that they were planting some of the existing phases as well, and I was quite pleased to see that they were planting some quite well-matured shrubs, sometimes in the forecourts and in the common areas. I also did like to see the way in which they were protecting some of the existing trees with padding. What's your experience with the way in which that's been dealt with and the going forward on the trees that need protection when the work around them is going on?
So my experience so far is that it's really hard to quantify because hardly any trees have been saved. The big ones on Bonchurch Road were saved, and, you know, notably the most expensive properties were put in front of those trees. There have been a lot of issues with in phase 1 and 2 with the replacement of trees. It really wasn't done at all. The trees that were planted in the park, half of them died because the drainage and the subsoil were not properly put in, and those trees, you know, when they did soil sampling, the contractors said it's just rubble underneath, the trees can't grow here. So, you know, so far the record hasn't been good, and, you know, we're hoping that that will change now because it's become such an issue locally and everybody is so exercised about it. But, you know, we just have to keep pushing.
Thank you. And then moving on to the applicants, I do actually take on board that point. The last summer wasn't so bad, but the 2 previous summers were very dry summers, so they were very bad for planting all over. So I'll say to the applicants, first of all, to go to the specific trees, I was curious to find out why they had to go T8, T33 and T34. Can you just confirm the reasons for that, and is that something that you would reconsider?
Sorry, couldn't get my microphone to work. Yes, certainly. So T8, this is a tree identified along Ladbroke Grove, yes, and it's adjacent to our new block, known as Block 8. This is, at the moment, I'm not sure whether you could see from your visit today, but it's very close to the existing building. It's about 2 meters away, and the tree is so large, actually the canopy does go over the top of the building, which suggests that not only does it require a lot of pruning, but it also will have quite considerable root growth underneath. We've actually done a lot of work looking at this. And if we were to demolish that building and rebuild the proposed building for Block 8, that tree wouldn't survive. In fact, in order to survive, it needs a minimum of 8 meters away from that building. We have actually looked at the block to see whether or not we could redesign it and what the implications would be to that block if we were to retain that tree, and we'd lose around 5 social rented homes as a result. So that's one of the main reasons why we're proposing to remove T8. The other 2 trees, T33 and T34, that's along Warnington Road. This is where we, as part of our proposal, have looked to chicane the road up and over, and that's due to a review of all the trees, by chicaning that road does mean that we have to lose those 2 trees, but it does mean that we save a number of trees below, which are identified to T27 to T32. So although we do have to accept that 2 trees would need to be removed, we are, by chicaning that road, retaining more trees as a result.
Okay, and had you also, because one of the things I noticed when I was there today, and I noticed on the plan where it's got the trees spaced out on the pavement, that was there any consideration for making these trees closer together? Because you could add more trees by simply making them just a few feet each way closer together. You could gain some more trees there.
So the planting design is intended to provide open space, so it's not too encompassing and overshadowing. And there's a variety of tree species, around 12, predominantly giving a lot of flowers through the year. So there's a lot of variety in the streetscape and different feels as you walk around that environment.
And would you also be open to some of the, well, first of all, for blocks 5 to 10, can you just confirm the forecourts in these blocks, which are shown as blank on here, they will be planted, that's correct, is it? With shrubs?
Yes, yeah,
thank you.
True.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, Chairman. My questions for the applicants, changing subject slightly, is about the unit mix. Now, I understand with the social homes that more 1 and 2 beds were required than larger properties in order to replace what's currently there and rehouse the people. I understand that. On the market housing, though, these are new people. It's not replacing homes for existing residents. And the unit mix diverges quite significantly, as has been noted in the report, from our local housing needs assessment, and very heavily weights 1 and 2 beds, and significantly underweights 3 and 4 beds, what we'd normally call family-sized homes. And in the report it says that Knight Frank have confirmed local market demand is predominantly for smaller units. Now, I would like to know what evidence there is for that. Are there lots of 3 and 4 beds in the area that nobody wants? What does it mean that Knight Frank have confirmed local market demand is for predominantly smaller units?
So we have had Knight Frank as our sales agent on phase 2B, and the patterns that we have seen from the demand of buyers that are coming to purchase homes is showing that the 1 and 2 bed options are the most popular that we've got. We've therefore chosen to try and reflect that patterns of what we've seen in this phase, and as well as that, I think we've introduced some smaller 1 beds as well, because that was again what was demand that we were seeing on the existing phase was. So Knight Frank as our agents have guided us and helped to shape the unit mix on the market housing.
So what does that mean, the patterns of demand? Do you have 3 and 4 beds that nobody wants?
It's not about that we're seeing that we've got 3 and 4 beds that no one wants. It's just that we're seeing a demand heavily weighted in favour of 1 and 2 beds.
Does that, and what do you? I still don't really understand what that means. I mean, a 4 bed or a 3 bed or houses far more people than a 1 bed. So you might have 3 times the demand for a 1 bed over a 3 bed, but you're still not housing any more people. So I don't understand what it means, the sort of patterns of demand. Do you have any sort of hard figures you can give?
Wouldn't say what we have hard figures. We have included quite a number of 2-bed 4, which can be argued is for a family-sized accommodation, with the 2nd bedroom being able to potentially have 2 children. But I don't have figures for that available. But yeah, in reflecting on what Knight Frank have said, we feel that the mix is appropriate.
Okay, I'm not fully satisfied that, but thank you anyway. Thank you, Chairman.
Good. Any other questions? Anne, last one. Yep.
So I wanted to ask a question about the public realm handover, and also I was surprised to see how much amenity space it will be lost as a result of the development. So to the objectors, can you talk about the public realm handover and why you think that would be a good thing? And then for the applicant, I'd want to know their response to your proposed condition, whether this is something that can be considered. And again, I guess just to my comment earlier about benefits for residents, you know, there is a loss of space that residents are going to suffer here. So what I would like to see is consideration of that and some kind of attempt to give back to the community. So objectors, please, if you could talk to us about your proposed condition.
Sure. I very briefly I only had a few seconds to mention this in my speech as I was running out of time. So what this is public realm handover and maintenance funding of all the public realm areas to the council. This is basically to prevent developer abandonment. It would allow us to integrate all the spaces into the existing public green space network in RBKC, which would provide a cohesive management and maintenance of public amenity areas. And effectively, if it was council run, it would more easily allow the community to reap the benefits and prevent exploitation or abandonment of that. I think not only yourself, Councillor Sarah, but other committee members are fully aware of what's happened in the past 15 years here. This is one of the most egregious examples of public amenity space being taken away. 10,000 meters squared cannot be understated, in addition to everything else the residents have had to go through. So that's the reason why we're proposing that as a condition, and it's to prevent further loss of space, long-term sustainability, and I think the cohesive management aspect would provide more social, economic, and community and health benefits. And it's in compliance with planning policy. So I hope that goes some way to explain it.
And that's helpful, and I think it would be helpful to hear what the applicant's thoughts are on your proposal.
So as part of the heads of terms, there is a public realm maintenance figure, which is listed in your report, and that's over a 10-year maintenance period. And then there's also the other public realm areas that are already going to be adopted by highways. So that's the neighbourhood garden square at the top of Warrington Road and Portobello Road, so that will be adopted. The courtyard garden's actually going to be, won't be adopted because that will be gated in the evenings, just for safety and security for the residents who live there. But all the other spaces that are on those adoptable highways, it's all part of the, RBKC's handover in the end. So there is only really that courtyard garden that is not being adopted. But there is that public realm maintenance figure as well, which is just over 370k over a 10-year period.
Okay, just before we move on, would you like to respond to that, Councillor Lowry?
I think one of the things that the condition specifically, if adopted, would secure is a secured financial provision from the applicant towards the council to help maintain and fund the public realm areas post-completion. So I think if the condition were adopted, it would just basically secure in writing all of this. And again, as outlined, it's all well and good for the applicant to say, okay, we'll consider it, we'll take this back, but it really needs to be in writing so that officers can then be delegated to make sure it happens.
Good. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No. I suggest we perhaps take a short break now for just 5 minutes or so. And then when we come back, it'll be the committee's opportunity to ask questions of officers and follow up on a number of the points, I'm sure, which have been made. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll start again in a minute or two. So I think we can make a start again if you'd like to take a seat. Okay, so colleagues, our chance to ask officers questions. I'd like to go first by asking about these proposed conditions that the objectors have talked about. And I'd be interested in officer response to comments about this. It seems that the suggested extra condition 1 about the quality of the new tree planting, I mean, it strikes me that that is probably covered within the existing conditions, but I can't see any problem about tightening it up and making it that much more explicit. So perhaps we can deal with that first.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So the existing proposed conditions, let me just get the reference numbers for you. Condition 44 in particular is securing the tree planting proposed by the applicant in the planning application. In my presentation, I took you through the size of the trees that are proposed, and they're effectively captured by that condition because it refers back to the document. So there's no need to amend the condition to specify the girth of those trees. In relation to the point around certified nurseries adhering to the British standard, well, any reputable nursery complies with the British standard. If we want to insert that into the condition to cross-reference it, don't see that as a problem. I don't know what a certified nursery is, personally, versus a non-certified nursery. I suggest we just add reference to the trees being supplied by reference to the British standard. And similarly, it will be for members to consider the remainder of the condition. The proposal currently includes 12 different species that have been looked at by our arboricultural team, who have discussed those proposed species in a lot of detail with Peabody to ensure that they are appropriate for the locations they're being planted and provide an enhanced habitat and biodiversity benefit over the existing trees. I am told by our specialists that the 12 species selected are indeed appropriate for the locations they're in. It will be for members to decide whether they think that should be opened up for further discussion and the species looked at again. The point around documentary evidence of tree provenance, I suppose, you know, this really links back to the kind of certified nurseries British standard point. It's any tree from a reputable nursery would be certified. So again, if you want to add some wording to that effect, then it's effectively belt and braces. But I don't see why that couldn't occur. The last point around trees that fail within 5 years of planting must be replaced. That's already secured in condition 44 anyway, and is obviously a requirement that we always put on planting plans, and you'll see that there.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Can I now go to the proposed condition, extra condition 3, about the public realm handover and maintenance? My understanding of this is that the public realm aspect would be adopted by the council in due course.
Yeah. So I think maybe the heads of terms in the report aren't quite explicit enough on this point, which may have led to some confusion, but ultimately all of the public realm and the streets are proposed to be adopted by the council, and the public realm maintenance contribution, the value of which was confirmed in the addendum report, is a contribution that's been secured for the maintenance of those landscaped areas within the public realm, and those areas will be maintained by the council's parks team, as opposed to the highways team, who will maintain the roads. That contribution has been sought for the public realm, the maintenance of the public realm, because it is kind of non-standard highway specification kind of planting and landscaped areas, and therefore under existing highways maintenance contracts, you know, the council can maintain it effectively. So that point is already dealt with. It will be secure. The adoption of those areas will be secured in the Section 106 agreement, and there is a contribution for the maintenance of those spaces by the council.
Okay, so essentially that is something that the Section 106 agreement can deal with. It can address this issue, because clearly it's important that things are maintained, that they're originally built and then they fall to bits or become, you know, unsatisfactory spaces. Then clearly that's not something we want to happen.
No.
So that's no. Can I then move to the condition for retaining the mature trees? I mean, it seems to me that this is really essentially a difference of opinion, that the applicant's put forward reasons why these trees need to be removed, in particular the 5 that you mentioned or have been mentioned, and essentially our tree officers go along with that. Is that a good summary of the situation?
Yes. I mean, clearly we've interrogated in a lot of detail the applicant's proposals and reasoning why these trees can't be retained. That's involved council's arboriculturists, it's involved the highways team, it's involved our drainage experts, and it's been looked at across the board. You know, clearly, if the opinion was that those trees could be retained, then we would be ensuring that they are retained. Can more trees be retained? Of course they can, but it will require scheme amendments, fundamental scheme amendments. There are not changes to this proposed scheme that can be made in order to retain any more existing trees. Okay. And those scheme amendments cannot be secured by a planning condition. They're too fundamental. And they alter the number of homes provided, they alter the mix of homes being provided, they alter the community centre layout and quality, and they are all things that will require reassessment if those changes are made, and it can't be dealt with under a planning condition. You can't fundamentally change a scheme under condition.
Yeah. And lastly, we have the extended shared street area going into the phases 1 and 2, which have already essentially been built. Now, what is the situation about that? I get the feeling from colleagues that there's quite a lot of sympathy for that as a general idea, that this would be something that, you know, would be desirable in many ways. But how could that be given a planning effect, if you like, in this application, which is, of course, only about phase 3?
Yeah.
Can you make some comments about that?
And ultimately, Councillor Husband, I think that is the challenge, to give planning effect to something that is desirable, but the planning application for you is what you have to assess, and ultimately does not include that shared street provision. So in order to secure whatever it ends up being in terms of an expansion of that shared street scenario, it couldn't be dealt with by condition. It would have to be done through the Section 106 agreement. The tests for planning obligations, it has to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, has to be directly related to the development, and it has to be fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. So if you pursue this, you have to satisfy yourself that it's not just something that's desirable, but it meets those tests in relation to the planning application before you. And I think that's the real challenge that we've got, because fundamentally those streets have been up to Murchison Gardens, which is effectively a lot of the area that is requested to be a shared street, have already been approved under the 2010 and the various alterations, have been subject to a Section 278 agreement under the Highways Act, and have been built and constructed to an agreed specification in the knowledge that phase 3 was always going to come forward, and we've accepted that that street layout is acceptable and provided it, and most of it is adopted. I believe Murchison Gardens isn't yet adopted because construction traffic is still using it, so we don't want to foot the bill for that effectively as the council, but will be adopted. So to then draw a conclusion in relation to phase 3 that kind of unravels all of that, and members would have to conclude meets those tests, is one aspect. The other aspect is fundamentally at this time it's just not something that's been looked at as whether or not it's feasible. Those streets have been provided knowing that a standard street section and layout can be provided. A lot of detailed work would have to be done to understand whether shared streets in those locations can be facilitated anyway. Those buildings exist. There are existing levels, thresholds, building lines. There's requirements for drainage, there's existing services, there's, trees have been planted. I'm not saying it's not feasible, but the Highway Authority, or me sitting here giving you advice on the planning application, we just don't know whether it's deliverable. So there's that hurdle as well. But fundamentally, I think it comes down to you've got a planning application before you tonight. And Peabody have said they will look at a deed of variation to the existing 278 in relation to phase 2. The council have adopted those streets, so we have a responsibility. And you mentioned earlier, beg your pardon, Councillor Husband, that if there's something that's agreed as being desirable, then there's no reason why discussions cannot move forward trying to see if this is feasible. But is that something that is related to this planning application you have before you, or is it a separate conversation?
Thank you. And I'm just one final thing, but I know I've talked for a long time. And that's about the new community centre building. The issue has been raised that the hours of operation seem to have been cut back very substantially from what essentially is, it's the reprovision of an existing building. Now, what's the rationale of that? Because I'm struggling a bit, because its sort of uses seem rather similar.
Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Yes, I can. I can offer you a potential solution. Unfortunately, I have been caught slightly unaware by that comment. Neither the Venture Centre nor the Council's property team have highlighted that. And therefore, because my understanding was that they did align with the existing licence for the Venture Centre. That's what I had been told. Clearly, we've heard representations from both councillors and residents that that's not the case. Therefore, I don't have an answer in terms of what the existing hours are, because I was under the impression that that related to the existing licence. I suggest if councillors are concerned and want the hours to effectively link to the existing licence, then that's a variation to those relevant conditions is delegated to effectively achieve that. But I can't tell you what those hours are at this moment in time, because I'll be honest, I was caught unaware by the raising of that issue tonight.
I think we're talking about conditions 22 and 23.
Correct.
I mean, colleagues, that may well be a sensible way forward, actually, with this. Okay, right, I've spoken quite enough. So, Tom, your chance to ask officer.
Thank you, Chairman. So 2 questions. First one sort of really follows on from what you were discussing, and I appreciate the points, Ms. Lomas, that you've made. Then the problem here is that overall, for both residents on the estate itself, who obviously have to go through a lot of disruption, the decants, etc., although at least they do get a new house at the end of it, but also neighbouring residents who have to go through a lot of disruption, losing a lot of amenity space. Some of them are now going to be overshadowed by a tall building, and they just really don't seem to be getting enough back. And I mean, looking at the section 106, and it adds up to just shy of just under £1 million with a TBC for public realm maintenance. and, you know, schemes are all a balance. There's, you know, you gain here, you lose here, and I appreciate, you know, there are a lot of benefits of this scheme, providing new housing and new social housing, but when we're providing 155 market homes and even a one bed goes for around £1 million, to have less than £1 million in the Section 106 agreement to make improvements to public realm, planting, etc. for local residents does not seem sufficient. So I wonder how much flexibility we have in terms of saying that that's not sufficient. It has to be greater. It's probably going to be hard for us to put a specific number on that at the committee, but perhaps delegating that back. And then in terms of how that money is spent, whether it's spent exactly within the red border or whether actually on discussion with the applicant and residents, it's generally agreed that that money's spent across the broader site. You know, that would be for future conversations to decide. But what level of flexibility do we have in saying that S106 isn't enough, there needs to be more money in it?
So any contribution that's secured in the Section 106 is there, it has to meet those tests I read out before, and it's effectively there to mitigate the impacts of the development. It's not about what the figure is or isn't. All those figures have come about because an impact is being mitigated and we've calculated what the relevant contributions are. We can't just put a figure on what we think is an overall amount that we think is relevant. I think if you are specifically saying there is something that you think a contribution should be secured for, then, you know, clearly that's something that can be discussed further. I'm not clear from what you said exactly what that would be. There was, sorry, yeah. Councillor. There was reference to obviously planting, but that's direct delivery, so it's not captured in the planning contributions because the planting will be delivered at the applicant's cost through the development. So you wouldn't see the cost in the contributions for that, because it would only be a contribution if the council is taking money to deliver it.
It's about enhancements to the public realm, to both in terms of ongoing maintenance as well as sort of upfront investment, to be sufficient to offset the disruption of the scheme. And what I'm saying is that it doesn't feel like there's the quid pro quo is sufficient. It doesn't feel like the disruption and the loss of amenity space is being effectively balanced out. And I completely agree, it wouldn't make sense to try and come up with a specific number at the committee, which is why I say, is it possible for us to delegate back if we were to say that, you know, there's not sufficient public realm improvements and maintenance, which, okay, may or may not include additional planting, but we don't know what it would cost to make it sufficient. So to delegate that back to Director of Planning, for example, to figure out what that looks like and what that number is.
I think it comes back to my previous last point, is anything within the red line boundary, the developer, the applicant, will directly deliver. So we wouldn't secure a financial contribution for public realm improvements, additional planting, etc., within the application site, because the council is not delivering any of that. The developer is delivering that, and therefore we wouldn't seek a contribution. Whether it's about, maybe the point you're making is not necessarily about contributions, it's about the public realm scheme that's put forward. That's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Well, they're in the S106 in 8.6 we have in front of us, has a line for public realm maintenance, which it says to be confirmed, and has a line for tree planting contribution, which it says to be confirmed, but 20,000 is a minimum. So that might be a starting point or an effective way of to be confirmed is presumably a number which needs to be filled in.
Those figures are confirmed in the addendum report. The tree planting contribution, I'm trying to find exactly what page of the addendum report for you, Councillor Bennett. It's on the 3rd page at the top, so you'll see paragraph 8.6, table of heads of terms. So the tree planting contribution is confirmed as £20,000. That tree planting contribution is to secure the planting of the 17 trees in the phase 1 site area that have been identified as locations where additional trees can be planted. In the 2024 permission, the Section 73, we secured a financial contribution to do an exploratory exercise to see where within the site area additional tree planting could be secured. That money was spent doing that exploratory work. Actually, the tree pits have been put in as well. This £20,000 is a contribution for the trees to go into those locations that we have actually identified as being feasible for additional tree planting, and the figure now has been confirmed as sufficient to cover that planting, so the acquisition and planting of those trees. The public realm maintenance figure, again in the addendum confirmed as 378,700, is a figure that we've looked at with our parks team. So again, this comes back to the point I was making earlier about the adoption of all of those areas and ensuring we have a contribution for the maintenance of those landscaped areas by the parks team going forward. And that's an evidence figure in terms of what the parks team are saying the maintenance of those spaces would cost for a period of 10 years. So effectively it's 37,870 a year extrapolated over 10 years, and that's how the figure's been derived at. So that's what those contributions are for. If you want an additional contribution, I need to understand more specifically what that's going to be used for, because we've already got a contribution covering maintenance of the public realm. We've got some off-site tree planting that has been done in a phased manner, because sensibly you need to look at actually the feasibility of planting these trees. So, you know, before I can kind of confirm something, I'm just trying to really get to the bottom of what we're going to achieve with an additional contribution.
So perhaps picking at straws here, but for example, I know there's one of the proposed conditions around the public realm extension, the sort of shared street extension. Much of it fell outside the red line for this application, but there was some additional shared space streets proposed for streets within the red line for this application. So would that, for example, need an additional contribution to deliver that?
It wouldn't need an additional contribution, because effectively any delivery of the shared streets would be done through a Section 278 agreement under the Highways Act at the applicant's expense, but that would be secured under the Section 278 agreement if that was in place. So there wouldn't be a financial contribution in planning terms for the delivery of a shared surface if, you know, obviously I spoke more generally before about how that relates to this planning application, but effectively in the scenario where that was being provided, similar to the existing section of shared street that's being proposed, there's no financial contribution for that because it will be delivered under a Section 278 agreement.
Okay, I mean, I was just, as you can tell, what I'm driving at is to try and give both some flexibility but also some teeth to a condition that goes beyond just saying, based on the goodwill of Peabody, which I'm sure is full of people with goodwill, but people change jobs and move on, beyond just the goodwill of Peabody, there will be meaningful sort of review and ideally investment in sort of further public realm enhancements, planting, etc. And knowing that we can't go in, you know, it's hard to go into too much detail just sitting here at committee, trying to give something both with teeth but also flexibility. But I'd probably kick the tyres on it as much as...
I just don't think a contribution... I mean, ultimately, that's the point I'm trying to make. A contribution isn't the resolution, because I don't know what would be securing a contribution for. The general point around, you know, is the public realm of sufficient quality, etc., to mitigate what's been lost, you know, that's something absolutely for you to consider. But a contribution, just a financial contribution in the Section 106, wouldn't be a mitigator for that, because I don't know how that would be linked back or deliver, how that money would be spent, because effectively any improvements are either directly delivered by the applicant within the Phase 3 land as part of the development, or under the Section 278 agreement with the council.
Is there, okay, moving aside, sorry, Chairman, bear with me for one more moment. Moving aside from Section 106, moving on from Section 106 contributions, is there any requirements we could make beyond just the requirement to have a discussion about maybe doing something at some point?
In relation to the Phase 3 land, i.e. the land within the red line boundary, if you conclude that an obligation meeting those 3 tests is something that you think ought to be added to the planning permission, then is it feasible to do that? Yes, provided it meets those 3 tests. It's necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, etc. The complication is the Phase 3 application land overlaps with the Phase 2 application land that has been delivered under a Section 278 agreement already, so the roads we're talking about. That doesn't mean to say it's not feasible, but I don't think you can go outside the red line boundary effectively, and I think you'll the commitments that Peabody have made, and the fact that the council have adopted those roads, you know, it's a discussion to be held outside of the planning application for the remainder of the land. Looking at the red line plan, I would suggest that you don't achieve much if you just look at the red line boundary anyway, and it ought to be considered comprehensively as a discussion between the council and Peabody. The council is the adopter of the streets, and Peabody is the developer. It's up to members if they want to, if they think obligations are necessary. The point I would make is, I've already touched on feasibility of delivery being critical. I don't think you could just require shared streets without proper feasibility work being undertaken, because you've got to be careful, you know, that you're not setting everybody up to fail effectively.
Thank you.
Who'd like to go next? Lloyd.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions. One is about parking and one is about a particular piece of architectural heritage. My question on parking is, do we know of the people that are moving out of the existing homes and then moving back in, how many of them have parking permits, and how does that affect the overall parking scheme? Because we've heard from the objectors tonight questions over the number of parking spaces.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't give you an exact figure, but the housing transportation team have looked at the parking provision. They know there are residents with a right to return who can apply, have parking permits and can continue to have those parking permits. From a purely highways perspective, the provision of 32 parking spaces is borderline under provision, not over provision, in terms of potentially creating too much parking demand in the area. That's the conversations I've had with the highways team. But they're satisfied on the information that they've got at present that it can work. There's also the requirement for the applicant to provide at least 3% disabled provision and demonstrate that could move up to 10% provision if required. 10% provision, you'll note, for 368 homes is actually 36.8 spaces, but is above the 32 spaces being proposed. So, I recognise the concerns around parking and that planning policy, the starting point is car free, but there are sound reasons why a level of parking has to be provided on this site. Officers think that's reached the very careful balance of tree planting, parking provision, and obviously there's need for servicing bays and everything else in the streetscape. So it's a careful balance, but that's the officer's view.
Thank you. My other question is something very, very niche and specific, and I understand this is something that the residents feel quite dearly about. So on the plan, which shows Murchison's Gardens and Warnington Road, on that corner is a piece of architectural heritage. It is a stone, soft red brick and engineering brick plinth with Warnington Green in the etched in the stonework, which has got a rather ugly sign attached to it and a bin next to it. The question is, can we provision that that can be saved, enhanced as an original piece of feature of the estate and architectural heritage? And I say that with a conservation area trustee architectural hat on. Do you know the do you know the item I'm talking about?
I'm looking at Google right now to understand where it's located.
I've got a picture here as well.
Yeah. So in principle, if you consider that obviously for the reasons you've given it's necessary, can a condition be proposed? Yes. The uncertainty I've got is I don't have plans in front of me that particularly show where that is currently located. Can it be left in situ, etc., etc. So I think any condition would potentially have to have a kind of a fallout clause that you know, we ultimately, you know, I don't know. This is the first I've actually heard of this desire. So a condition, yes, possible, but I don't know in the current layout and road arrangement and building arrangement exactly whether it can be secured, and therefore I think the condition has to be about looking at.
I'm fairly confident looking at it today that it doesn't interfere with any of the buildings. It's on a corner, and even if it did, it can actually be moved. It's of that size, but it is a piece of the original architecture of the estate when it first started. So I would like to have some sort of provision to save that piece of historical architecture if possible.
And so, just to confirm, Councillor, so if a condition is considered necessary by councillors, and the resolution is obviously to grant, that condition presumably we would have to construct that in a way that in the first instance secures it in situ, but does acknowledge, and I think you said it is possible for it to be moved, so to details of how it will effectively be moved, where it will be moved to, etc., as part of that condition.
Thank you. I'm sure that can be delegated to officers.
Anne, and then Toby.
Well, a couple of things. I guess just going back to what Councillor Bennett was talking about. I mean, I feel, as I think Councillor Bennett feels, that we're kind of not getting enough here for our residents, for the disruptions that they've suffered, for the conversations we had around the trees, the public realm. And I understand your reasoning around the 20,000 for the trees. Doesn't feel like very much for the 17 in phase 1. It just doesn't feel like enough. And when we look at the conditions that the objectors have put forward, the first condition is about, the existing planting. I'm sure that there's more that can be done there with greening. And actually, you're saying, well, how does it make the development acceptable? This point about 50% of the trees that were planted have had to be replaced, and the roped off grass area. I really know that this has happened. So I guess there's a kind of feeling of uncertainty that we're going to get these benefits that are being talked about. And I just wonder whether we need to have some kind of third party that comes and checks the way the trees are being planted, or checks that the grass is actually, available for residents, because that grass is not there, and I know it's not there. And I think that's what's sort of being flagged here is a I don't want to use the word distrust, but I think people feel that what was promised to them was not delivered, and I guess that's what we're trying to make sure doesn't happen in this part of the development. So I don't know how we answer that, but I think my feeling is that it's not enough around the biodiversity, the greening, the trees, the making sure that the tree planting is successful, the making sure that the grass is available for residents. So anyway, I also wanted to ask about the tower block, and there were some issues that were raised around that. So I would like to ask how tall this tower block is going to be, and perhaps you can talk to us about why it's gone from 9 to 15 stories, and about what the residents are going to get as a result of that increase in height. I'd also like to ask, and I'm sure I should know all of this, but I understand that the social rent houses, homes are going to be re-provisioned. I get that there's going to be new ones. I really do welcome the fact they're going to be made available for adult children. I mean, I've seen some terrible cases of overcrowding. I think everybody deserves the opportunity to have a new home. So, I really understand the benefits that are being delivered here. But yeah, I mean, if you could talk to us about the increase in the size of the block, and I guess also the question of how tall it's going to be. So, I mean, I think these new homes have got higher ceilings. So, how does it compare to notable buildings in the area? And then just on the social rent houses, you use the term affordable homes in your presentation, but I think these are social rent homes and market value homes, presumably being built to pay for the development. So if you can just clarify what the difference is there affordable, and is it the same thing as the social rent? Sorry, it's a lot of questions, but yep. You only get a few minutes to talk, so.
I'll try and answer them. I'll probably miss some, so remind me. I'll start with the tower. I'm just trying to find the part of the report that sets out the building heights. Obviously, it is a 15-storey building. It's on page 18 of the committee report. All of the heights of the buildings are set out within that table. You'll see the height from ground to the top of the building, excluding plant, is 52.095 metres. In the local plan, we have two definitions of what constitutes a tall building. The first definition is 21 metres from ground. The second definition is 30 metres. Those two definitions are location-based, i.e. depending on where in the borough you are, the relevant definition applies. In this location, the definition of a tall building is 30 metres or more. So of all the buildings under our tall buildings policy, block 9A, the 15-storey tower that you're referring to, is a tall building. This site is not identified as a location for tall buildings in the local plan. So within the report, I'll point you to the relevant sections, but obviously officers have looked at that in detail and concluded that there is a departure from those policies that relate to tall buildings. If I can find the relevant paragraphs, just to refer you to them. Paragraph 7.176 onwards. Officers have also, as per policy requirements, assessed the impacts of the tall buildings, so the visual, functional, environmental and cumulative impacts. Officers have concluded that the impacts are acceptable, hence why we've concluded moderate weight should be given to the conflict with the tall building policies, both local and London Plan policies. Remind members that conflict with individual policies does not mean conflict with the development plan as a whole, and that's how a planning assessment is made. Is a development in accordance with the development plan when read as a whole. A development plan contains a whole range of policies with specific requirements, and clearly some of those policies inevitably pull in different directions. Decision makers have to resolve where policies are pulling in different directions, ultimately whether it does comply with the development plan as a whole. Officers think it does. This is an allocated site, allocated for a minimum 373 homes. The proposal doesn't meet the minimum requirement of the site allocation. It falls short. The maximum number of homes that can be delivered are 370 in the options provided. Why has the building increased from 9 to 15 stories? I mean, ultimately that's a design decision on behalf of the applicant, but there are lots of things that they've had to look at in locating the buildings, programming the space, ensuring the size and quality of those units are acceptable, ensuring the public realm is acceptable. There's a lot of factors that feed into why a scheme ultimately ends up being what it is. With that 15-storey building, it still does not meet the site allocation, and we're hearing objections that not enough public realm is being provided with a 15-storey building. It's complex in order to meet all the requirements that you're expected to meet. It's not as simple as it should be X amount of stories or not. Ultimately, it goes back to that assessment. You have to decide, do you agree there's a conflict with that policy? If you do, does it conflict with the development plan when read as a whole? If you think it does, contrary to what officers have concluded, you've still got within the planning balance to assess whether there are material considerations that outweigh the lack of conflict with the conflict with the development plan. That's how you make a planning decision. It's complicated, but you're the planning committee. That's what you're here to do. It's not as straightforward for major developments pretty much every policy in the local plan, every policy in the London plan is relevant. There are always going to be departures to one degree or another, and you have to weigh all of that up and come to a conclusion.
Okay, and how does it compare to other 15-storey buildings? I guess I'm trying to just get at, is the ceiling height of these new units more than the ceiling height of the old ones?
More than likely, yes, because they were designed and built in the 1960s onwards, whereas these are being built to modern space standards and requirements. I don't have a floor-to-ceiling height figure in front of me, but I suspect the floor-to-ceiling heights, yes, are bigger than those in the existing buildings.
So a new 15-storey building is taller than an old 15-storey building?
I'd say
I guess
in
I'm
most
just trying to
cases,
figure out
probably.
how tall it really is going to be. I mean, I know it says 53 metres, but what does that compare to in the area?
I'd be guessing. I don't know. We've got the Townscape and Visual Impact Assessment. Those views are available to you in the report. I've presented some tonight as well. They show from particular locations what the visual impact is. So you, regardless of kind of exactly what 50 metres means or not, you've got information before you to understand visually how that's going to present. And you make your assessment based on that information.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got two questions. The first is really a follow-on about parking, and the second has sort of more far-reaching implications, I think. So really this is to clarify things for me. In terms of parking and the amount of on-street parking we're ending up with. Now, on the one hand, we're making sure that anyone who does have a parking permit, who's a current tenant, will retain it. But there is a pretty substantial increase, and any new council tenancies are at the moment contingent on not being given a parking permit. Given how much of this is intended to be social rent, I'm a little confused about what the rationale is for that much on-street parking. And just as an addendum to that, I did highlight that 7.299, the curbside parking capacity being provided allows for the opportunity for a 3% right disabled access, is what we're talking about. Why is that dependent on the curbside parking capacity? I don't understand the logic there, and this might be me missing something.
Hopefully I'll answer the question. If not, just come back to me. The rationale for the on-street parking, the existing estate included parking forecourts, so parking was provided off-street. The layout of this proposed development is such that it's a street-based scheme, similar to most of the borough. Parking is proposed on-street. In those circumstances, there is no off-street parking proposed as part of these proposals. In terms of the provision, so existing estate residents who have a right to a parking permit and will remain on the estate will continue to have a right to that parking permit. New residents, as per policy requirements and what we secure on all new developments, will not be eligible to apply for a parking permit. That will include the social rent and the market homes. I've also just remembered I didn't answer one of Councillor Siren's questions about affordable housing. I'll come back to that. So effectively, only the residents that are remaining will have a right to a parking permit.
Right, I suppose I'm confused about the numbers, but you know what? I'd rather just get onto my main question. Now, well, it's a question which has some sort of implications. I believe the Venture Centre is absolutely the most pressing concern I have. And, I mean, we've addressed it, but again, understanding that maybe I'm a bit of a dummy, but there's a lot of what I'm really looking for is how can we legally be, how can we reach a decision, be legally empowered to actually make sure that, if we're delegating, I don't know what's going to happen. I cannot, in good faith, support something which has a condition or leaves it open for a reduction of hours. I'm really concerned about that. I mean, furthermore, a lot of the proposed conditions, the proposed from objectors. I mean, I'm really looking for what we can do. I do take very well your concerns about what may or may not be workable in the future. I just want to know what is actually available to us now to make a decision, because there are some red lines there, and I need to know if I'm making my decision here in good conscience, in good faith, what we can be sure of and what we can't. Potentially allowing this massive reduction in hours of one of our absolutely most important community centres would be a massive red line.
Yeah. So on the hours, absolutely appreciate the without knowing what those hours would be in terms of delegating that, there's uncertainty. I think members can be clear on what that delegation is, i.e. if that delegation is those conditions are varied to match the existing hours, then different hours can't be put in those conditions effectively, because the delegation is quite direct. It's not to go away and have a conversation, decide what those hours are. So members could be quite direct in terms of what that delegation is. The second point, in terms of, I think I've answered as best I can how a planning application before a planning committee to make a planning decision should consider the points that have been raised. And I think, I don't have, you're saying what can be done. Ultimately, if something was required to make this planning application acceptable and achievable, officers wouldn't be withholding that. So without going over the points I've already made, I'm struggling to advise you any further.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman. Two more questions. I'll try and be as quick as I can. The first one is just going back to the point I made earlier on unit sizes, the unit mix for the market housing. It just seems like we've rolled over a little bit easily on that to allow the applicant to really prioritise 1 and 2 beds at the expense of 3 and 4 bed family homes. So I was just sort of wondering why. Okay, it might be a little bit easier for them to sell 1 or 2 beds, but we have our housing needs assessment. So why did we let them sort of pick their own rather different mix? And is there anything we can do about it? I expect not at this point. And then the second point, I'm just going to come back for one more round on the shared space scheme. I mean, whereas there are parts within the red line on Murchison, on a bit of Portobello, and I think on the top road, is it Wernington, that aren't shared space but are within the red line. Could we have a commitment to fund a And there is impact on sort of stress and impact on the area. So could we have a commitment to fund an investigation as to whether a broader shared space scheme is possible, then with some follow-on commitment to enact that if the result is that it is possible?
In relation to the unit mix, it's paragraph 7.92 of the report. There's a table there that sets out the mix of homes being proposed. I mean, ultimately, officers have concluded that that proposed unit mix is a departure from policy. So we're not saying it's acceptable in its own right. It comes back to obviously the point I was making before in terms of, are those departures sufficient to mean it doesn't comply with the development plan overall, and obviously factoring in material considerations, etc. Just talking around the provision, so the local housing needs assessment identifies a need for 40% two-bed homes. The applicant is proposing 45.8%, and they are two-bed, four-person homes, which the council has considered to be suitable for families previously. So, yes, they're not providing a kind of local housing needs compliant level of 3- and 4-bed homes, which you would definitely identify as family-sized homes. But the two-bed provision is for homes that could provide for a family. The over-provision in one-beds is ultimately why officers have resolved that it doesn't conform with that policy. What I should say is policies around housing mix aren't prescriptive. It doesn't say every scheme must provide a unit mix broadly in conformity with the local housing needs assessment. The unit mix that the local housing needs assessment shows is what the council should seek to achieve over the local plan period through every development that comes forward. Each development doesn't need to conform with it. There will be particular locational, site-specific reasons why a particular unit mix is acceptable. Obviously, I'm not saying that the officers have come to that conclusion here, but I just want to be, in your mind, to be clear that it's not that schemes have to conform to that unit mix, specifically on individual schemes. Sorry, your second question, the more important question, I suspect. I've said it multiple times, I will say it again. Members have to satisfy themselves that an obligation meets those three tests. If you satisfy yourself that a planning obligation requiring the applicant to fund a feasibility study for extending the shared surface space meets those tests, then is it something that can be included in Section 106? Yes. It's sensible that it's a feasibility study because of the points I've raised around whether this is actually possible. So ultimately, I think if members satisfy themselves that it meets those tests, it's something that can be explored. How much that contribution is, you would have to delegate that for officers to understand how much that is likely to cost, because I can't estimate that tonight.
And could that be a feasibility test with some requirement to enact it if it is feasible?
Sorry, Councillor, I missed the requirement to... Sorry,
you do the feasibility test, it says it's feasible, we then would like it to be done, so there has to be can there be a second part to that?
I'm just trying to resolve in my own mind how, as I said, these roads that we're talking about have already been delivered under a Section 278 under the Phase 2 development and are adopted by the council. So in terms of once we have a feasibility study and these are council-owned roads, what delivery looks like and whether this Phase 3 planning application can be responsible for delivering that ultimately, I'm potentially going to defer to the legal officer for further advice.
Perhaps an appropriate contribution towards or wording.
Yeah, just to try to assist. First things first, we're talking about Phase 3. This application is only about Phase 3. I can't see how the SIL tests could be met to change something in Phases 1 and 2, which have already been approved a long time ago and built out in effect. So I think we need to concentrate on Phase 3. I mean, strictly speaking, you should be concentrating on the application that is before you, which has got shared services for part of Phase 3, not all of Phase 3. But if you, as Martin has pointed you to the SIL tests many times, if you feel that it would comply with the tests, I suppose we could include another Section 106 obligation, and I think it would have to be in the Section 106 because it would be too complicated for a condition, but perhaps have another obligation which states that the applicant will carry out this feasibility study at its own cost, at its own expense, and then you don't have to worry about how much it's going to cost. So they do that at their own expense, and then if as a result of that study it is feasible to extend the shared services, then I suppose they would have to, I suppose, come up with some designs of what it would look like, and then submit that to the council for approval by, in its planning hat and local highway authority hat for approval. And if it can be done, and if it is approved, then there would have to be either the same, another Section 1, it would have to be done under a Section 278 agreement. So basically, I mean, there is already a Section 278 agreement that is required under the Section 106 for the shared services that are already there. So it's a question of timing, but it could be another Section 278 agreement that could be entered into, under which the applicants have to enter into Section 278 and fund it under that agreement. So it's highway works that would be carried out by the applicant at its own expense as part of that highways agreement. I mean, I'm just...
But just to... Sorry, Laura, I shouldn't be asking you questions, but to my understanding of what Ms Bowery said is that relates to the Phase 3 application site area specifically.
I'm only talking about Phase 3.
If that's all we can do, that's all we can do.
Well, I mean, we don't know if it's possible even.
Yes.
So you'd have to have the feasibility study, and then
Understand
only
that.
if that shows it's possible can you move on to the next step.
Understood.
Okay. Right. So just to make absolutely certain I've understood what this conversation's. So what we're saying is we think that within the Section 106 system, or possibly because there's the existing Section 278, which relates to highways, that within that structure, that planning legal structure, it would be possible to add a feasibility study for the remaining roads in Phase 3 to see if it was possible to make those shared spaces. Does that make sense? And Tom, I think, is that what you're getting at? And I think officers are saying that if that was what we wanted to do, then that would be feasible. That, the feasibility study would be feasible. But yeah, but we would be entitled, we would be able to do that. Yes.
The obligation would be in the Section 106 agreement.
Right. Okay.
You have
so
to do the feasibility study and submit designs if it's possible.
Yes.
If it is possible, then it would be delivered under another Section 278 or the same one.
The work would end up being in this Section 278, is it?
It's a highways agreement.
Which is a highways it's a mechanism for delivering highways work. Okay. I mean, I suspect, colleagues, I think we'd want to do that. Yeah, I would suggest. Are there any other questions to Martin about maybe something else or something?
Well, just there's a couple of questions that I think weren't answered from my. Sorry, it's,
Okay,
I know I asked a lot. So, just on the affordable versus social rent, if you could just clarify the differences and what we have here.
Yeah. So forgive me, I'll just pull the numbers up. The affordable housing being proposed is primarily social rent. I will get the numbers. There are 7 shared ownership, which is an intermediate home ownership.
So is the social rent a subsection of the affordable? I guess what we're concerned about here is, I don't know, people getting hold of these flats and renting them, you know, doing things that we don't want them to do with them. We want real people who live here to live in these flats.
Yeah, so the majority of the affordable housing is secured as social rented housing. If you, I can pull the figures up. I just have to find the relevant part in the report. I think the number is 200, between 206 and 208, depending on the option that's delivered. That's a number of social rented homes, and there are 7 shared ownership homes. Shared ownership is an intermediate affordable housing product that I'm sure you're aware of. It's been around since
Okay,
the 80s.
so that's helpful. Just a couple of... Did you... Okay. No, just a couple of things I wanted to just say. So about the Venture Centre, you know, I completely endorse what Councillor Benton said. That worries me a lot. I mean, it's just a fabulous place that's been providing for local children long before any of this happened. So we need to make sure that and the way that it operates is secured. And just on the list of the Section 106, I mean, just for the record, 150 grand on public art and 20 grand for trees, given the conversation we've had here, doesn't seem particularly appropriate to me. And look, culture plan is great, but you know that benefits people in the whole borough. And we're talking about people who've had 10 years of disruption and now they're getting harm from, you know, a tall building. They're getting harm from, you know, the mix which has changed. And there's a departure from policy. And I understand it's complex and there are lots of moving parts, but I guess, look, the last thing I wanted to say, and maybe the Director of Planning can comment on it, and I'd like to hear what she's got to say, but I feel that contributions are there to alleviate harm, and there's quite a lot of harm here, and I feel like we haven't really, I mean, you know, the shared streets is good. I really worry about the fact that the previous permission, you know, has resulted in a badly planted scheme where half the trees have died and there's no grass. So these conversations are helpful and good, and obviously it's nice to have new trees, but we've had experience that it hasn't worked before. So what are we going to do to make sure it works this time? And I feel that we need to do more. You know, of course we welcome the extra homes, and all of this is good, and it's very hard to think about not approving a scheme that delivers this, but yeah, anyway, I'd be grateful to hear Director of Planning's comments on what else could be done.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Siren. In regard to what else could be done for the maintenance of the grassed areas in the trees, for example, that you've given, one example could be, and it's only an example, is the securing of a bond. So that would enable you to insist that a sum of money is set aside in the event of those matters that you've highlighted as examples not meeting the satisfaction of X. So, you know, you've referenced the fact that the park has had failures in the past in respect of the establishment of the grass. So one example would be to secure a bond if, as we hope, the grass does establish itself, the trees are able to establish and go on to thrive, then that bond would become redundant and become returnable to the developer. If it was not, and if it had to be utilised because there were failings in respect of that, then those funds that are secured could be potentially utilised for that purpose. We would have to be very prescriptive about that because, you know, we couldn't just ask for money's sake, but if there were a genuine reason as referenced by Martin, then it's a possibility.
How would that fit into a recommendation, having a bond? I think it's a good idea. I think Councillor Sirens, I think your response to Councillor, I think it's an extremely good idea. What form would that be? A conditional? Would we again be back at the Section 106 agreement?
It would be an additional obligation contained within the Section 106
Section 106 agreement. That would be the mechanism of actually doing it.
Well, that sounds like very welcome news. And in terms of the possibility of renegotiating contributions to alleviate some of the harm, and I'm thinking about the greening, additional trees, possible extra biodiversity, could any of that be renegotiated? And I completely understand Mr. Lomas's explanation about the conditions being necessary, but I think, you know, there is a significant impact here, and more impact than there was, you know, when this was originally applied for. So I guess that's why I'm pushing on this.
I would suggest not, in short. The negotiations have been going on for a very long period of time, and with respect to the applicant, they have been amenable, having listened to residents in altering the number of trees that are likely to be lost. I also note here that the end product, in terms of the fully implemented scheme, would see a net increase in the number of trees on the site. I am content that officers have honoured the Select Committee recommendation that we work hard as an officer group to satisfy, as best as we're able to, the community's plea for serious consideration of tree retention. It is something we take seriously and have done to date. I'm not confident that we are able to push any further in respect of the provision of additional trees. The selection of trees is a good one. It's supported by our arboricultural officers and has been given serious consideration to the biodiversity value of those trees to make sure that they've got good purpose also. So, you know, I do recognise that it's likely that if this committee were minded to grant consent tonight, there would be a degree of disappointment with communities. But I offer assurance that officers have worked very hard to reach this negotiated point.
Just thank you for that. And one last question about the art, the public art, and the amount of money that's been earmarked to that versus to the trees.
Yes. So the figure as listed in the heads of terms for public art stroke the culture plan contribution is £150,000. That is a negotiated figure and would not necessarily be for the provision of public art. The adopted local plan 2024 leans into the council's culture plan, and it is intended that those sums are purposed for the benefit of our communities in terms of their access to culture. And as I say, that's a negotiated figure that we've arrived upon via negotiation.
And is that for the very local community or the community of RBKC?
I'm not able to say now because I haven't had sight of the... I understand that the cultural plan is being redrafted, so I dare not second guess the content of that plan, nor whether or not the council would be minded to adopt it. I think it would be presumptuous of me at officer level to say that, you know, what the content is likely to be. It's outside of my remit.
I think, Councillor Siren, I think the point is well made. I think we all agree with what you're saying. Okay, so I think we need to make a decision. I think, to my mind, we haven't actually talked about it all that much, but this application is actually very important because it's phase 3 delivers an amount of new housing, including affordable housing within the social rent category, that is far above anything that this authority has approved for a number of years. So it's a very, very significant, very significant addition to the borough's housing stock. And I think that has to be considered a major benefit of the scheme. And I think it means that along the way, quite a few things that in an ideal world perhaps wouldn't exist, like a 15-storey building, probably in terms of the planning balance, they have to be accepted as part of the planning balance. Does anyone on the committee fundamentally disagree with that proposition, that the overall importance that this application does create potentially new housing? Is there anyone who disagrees with that?
Well, Chair, not to say that I would disagree. I just I would fundamentally disagree that providing that amount of homes is contingent on all that we've just heard tonight. I think it's kind of that simple. Obviously, I'm as much, if not more than anyone else, want to see more social rent. But we're talking about quite substantive impacts to people in the most famously the most multi-deprived ward in the city, who've already, you know. So that if you're asking for balance, I think it really depends what we're talking about. There are some things, like I said, are red lines.
Okay. Well, I think I see exactly where you're coming from on that. I think that my next point would be, I think, overall, I think it sounds as though there is an acceptance of the fundamental importance of this application in its capacity to deliver new housing. And that, I think, the next step is to think about some of the things. We've had very long, detailed discussions about conditions, about the Section 106 agreement. And I think there are various things here that, to my mind, we can do which help make the scheme that's in front of us better. Now, with the help of my colleagues and officers will chip in, I just have got a few I'd just like to run through quite quickly. And, of course, the wording, exact wording of this will inevitably have to come down to officers. So starting off with conditions, I think we're very clear that the conditions relating to trees, that we have to feel completely confident that they are watertight. So the conditions that relate to the tree planting scheme, the maintenance of trees, that we have to be certain that those conditions are worded as tightly as possible. The next item, which was this, well, I was going to say small, but perhaps that's the wrong way, which I think again would be a condition that Councillor North mentioned that there is this rather unusual piece of heritage relating to the original building of the estate. Now, I think that would come under a condition, so that could be mentioned. I think, Lloyd, it's a sort of plaque relating to when the original Warnington Green estate. Yes, yes. Yes, right, okay. Yes, and it's something, so the point being that that's something that by condition we could say we would want that retained. I mean, it might be that it needs to be moved somewhere else, but the point is we would want that retained. So we'd want a condition that does that. The next thing, which I think, and actually I'm going back to, with the greatest of respect to Councillor North, something which I think is really fundamental, and that is the community building and its hours of use, because I think Mr. Lomas, it sounded as though kind of those of us around the table now perhaps weren't completely sure what the existing hours of use were. But I think we are quite clear, if I've understood it, particularly Councillor Benton, that it's absolutely essential that the existing provision has hours of use attached to it, which enables all of the different organisations to be able to function in the way that they do at the moment. Am I understanding that?
You are, and yeah, just to be very, very clear, I mean, so for example, nursery provisions, you know, at the moment we're talking about not being able to start the day until after 3 o'clock, whereas now it's 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., something like that. I actually forget the exact numbers, but we're actually talking about providing those sorts of services, which is all day.
So I think that those conditions relating to the community building, which I think that the conditions 22 and 23, and I think they need to be changed, and I think the committee is, if we approve this, is giving a very clear steer as to what we expect to happen. Yeah? Then, having dealt with these relating to that are condition matters, we come to the Section 106 agreement, and we have two additional things which I'm proposing, if I've understood colleagues correctly. First of all, that within the Phase 3 application in front of us, there's some pieces of road which are not actually shared space. And what we're saying is that there should be a Section 106 obligation to do a feasibility study to see if it's possible to make those roads within the Phase 3 application into shared space. And I think we've heard, if I've understood, we've heard from officers that is something that we are able to do. Okay. So I think we should do that. And finally, the director suggested something that I'd certainly not thought of, and that is a lot of these concerns about, excuse me, a lot of these concerns about the maintenance of the public realm and the trees, that it's incredibly important that they are properly maintained, and that within the Section 106 agreement there might be some kind of bond added to that, which would, in effect, it would be ensuring the proper maintenance of everything that's proposed. Yes, it's planting, but also it would maintenance of the public realm and that kind of thing. So I would imagine something quite broadly drawn.
Sorry, Chair, can I just check on that? Because with regards to the public realm, that's all being adopted. And we've already got this public realm maintenance contribution. So it would be the council maintaining it. So I don't really understand why there would need to be a bond.
The response was just in respect of any failures. So if as the example of the phase 2 park, where it was considered by residents that the maintenance of the grass was not sufficient because it had been poorly laid, and it turned out that the subsurface was not appropriate to maintain the good quality grass, then there would be a provision that enables any rectification.
For phase 2?
No, that was, the example was what had happened on phase 2, okay. But this is in relation to phase 3 only. So that was an example given, but I would push members to give officers a steer as to what specifically within phase 3 you would wish to apply such.
Yes, I think that's very much what we have in mind.
Sorry, and you're talking about until such time as they are adopted by the council, because once they're adopted by the council is responsible.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you mean in that interim period?
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm hoping that I've captured all of the things from our discussions. Yes. So with that in mind.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I know this is annoying, but going back to condition 44, you said it needed to be as watertight as possible. This is the one about the trees. Okay, and there was this condition that was put forward, and there was certain things that could be done to strengthen the condition, but we didn't talk about how you want to change it. You just said make it more watertight, but I think we just need to make it clear in what way you want it changed.
Well, I think to my mind, the objectives in their document, which is obviously a part of the record, their suggested one in enhanced quality and density of new tree provision. They set out relating to British standards, for example, which, to be honest, I think that's something that only officers could really do. So none of us could really write something like that.
Just British standard.
Are you quite happy about that?
Yeah, if it's just going to require compliance with British standards, if that's what you want.
Well, yes.
Yep, that's fine.
Yeah. Fine. Okay. Martin, do you have
Chairman,
a last word?
I know you don't want me to labour on the point, but you reference the condition that's being put forward in this document. That condition has several points in it, but from what I've just heard is you just want reference to the British standard, not the other aspects that are mentioned in that condition.
Yes, I think that's what we are able to do, essentially. That's what we're able to do as a committee. Okay. Right. Amanda.
So before you move to vote, Chairman, if I may just capture what you've summarised. Condition 22 and Condition 23 relating to the hours of operation of the community centre are to match the existing hours. Delegation to officers for the safekeeping and resituation on site of the Warnington Green stonework as identified by Councillor North and referenced as the pedestal. Consideration of a additional obligation dealing with highways agreement that considers the feasibility study at the expense of the developer for the shared space within phase 3 only, whereby the developer would prepare designs, they would submit for approval, they would implement, retain and maintain via a Section 278 agreement in the event of feasibility proving to be it proving to be feasible. The consideration of a bond for the maintenance of trees in the interim period before handover to the council as adopted by the council. And lastly, in relation to condition 4, draft condition number 44, reference to the trees needing to meet British standard.
Right. Thank you. I think everyone, you'll understand that officers are always very keen that they're completely clear about what it is that members are sort of asking them to do, which is because the normal way that planning works is that the planning officers go away and actually write the exact wording that gives all of these things effect. So we need to make a decision. So the recommendation in front of us is to grant permission with the conditions set out in the report, incorporating the various amendments to conditions and also to the Section 106 agreement. So that is the recommendation. Of course, this, if we approve this, it actually goes back to the Mayor of London for stage 2 consideration. But we're making it clear that we support this. So that's the recommendation. Can I see those in favour of the recommendation, please? Okay, thank you very much indeed. So that's, that is agreed unanimously. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming along this evening. It's quite a long evening, but many thanks.